Okay, so 2 weeks ago, we set up the following problem. We said that there's the sugya that we have, whatever on Brachos 19b to 20a, makes as clear as can be that at the end of the day, you cannot get right. You cannot simply say that whatever overrides all halakha. There are exceptions. There are places where halakha overrides kavod. Now, we argued that exception might be symbolic when we set that up in ways over the last 2 weeks. So we'll try and set up again how we did that. But it's right that the way the sugya is structured is there's an opening proposition, which is that you have to tear clothing off in public in order to, if you're wearing shatnez. That's clearly a case where halakha trumps kavod. We along the way, the Gemara then quotes 5 cases that seem to contradict that. We say, oh, derabanans are different, money is different, passive is different. Right, that was right. That's right. So we have all those exceptions, but at the end of the day, active, not money, not good. The problem is that we saw that in the Moshav's Kingdom, that's the first source on page 2, which is quoting from the Piskei Rabbeinu Avigdor Sarfati, right? It was one of the Balei Tosfot. That's about all I can tell you about him. So he says at the end, he says Iksat Kasha, right? If you have some difficulty because it says that Koda Brios is docha lota say only b'shev al taseh, but the Kuma say not. And his answer is we can say v'yesh lamar v'hani mili kvod hamet av kvod habrit d'chaim doche v'afilu b'kuma say. That's only talking about honoring the dead. Honoring the living, that can wipe out that can wipe out even halacha b'kuma say. So hang on, what? How can that be? Right? How can that be? Right, that was a fundamental problem that he seems to interpret the last line of the Gemara only in the context of Kvod HaMeitz, but since that's the source, right, where do you get the idea that there's something called Kvod HaChaim, which is a form of Kvod HaBriot that can push aside even more? Right, very, very puzzling. So we pointed out that the Rambam, the next source on page 2, also treats the Gemara's last answer a little bit peculiarly. Right, the Gemara. Right, the Gemara says that Shevel Tas Shani, and yet the Rambam in Hilchot Klayim Perek Gid Halacha Chavtet does not mention apparently the distinction between passive and active. The Rambam says the following: if you see Deoraita Kilayim on your friend, even if your friend is in the marketplace, you jump on him and you tear his clothing off immediately, even if your friend is also your teacher who has taught you. Because Kvod HaBriot doesn't push aside a negative commandment that is explicit in the Torah. So we were bothered by what is that language? Explicit in the Torah. Where did that come from? And then Rambam says, what about the exceptions? Right. So he said, "I'm a Furash, but Torah." So we already know that we're talking about Deraises, not the Rabbanim. So that gets rid of the first 3 questions in the Gemara. And what about Hashavat Avedah? Okay, that's different. So now he quotes the Gemara's answer to the 4th case. Right? So that's talking about money. Okay, and then he says, why is Kvod HaBriot pushed aside in terms of the prohibition of becoming Tameh? And his answer is, because the Torah says explicitly that you can't, that whoever we're talking about cannot become Tameh for their sister. The Piash Mu'alam do is they learn from tradition. He can't become Tameh for a sister, but he can become Tameh for a mate mitzvah. So that was the stage in the Gemara before the line Shevel Tas Shani. Right? The Gemara said, "Why don't we learn from it?" And the Gemara said, "Oh, that's because it says L'Achoto." The Gemara said, "Ligamer Minei." Right? Let's learn from it. That this is always true. The Gemara says, "No, you can't learn from that last brayta about Tumat Mate to all Isurim because you can only learn from it to all passive Isurim." The Rambam leaves out the last line. It looks like the last 2 lines of the Gemara, but the Gemara Minei, oh right, no, that Shevel Tas Shani don't exist in the Gemara Rambam. That's really weird. Okay, then he goes back. He says, "Well, right, but it's the Rabbanan. That's fine." But okay, we knew that already. So what happened to the answer of Shevel Tas in the Rambam? So I suggested last time that the answer is maybe I'm making for now too big a deal of it. Because maybe he includes that in Lo Ta'aseh Mefurash B'Torah. What he means is it can't push aside a do not that is explicit in the Torah. Now, what are the cases in the Gemara that we're really responding to? The cases in the Gemara that we're really responding to are the cases of where you're postponing a circumcision or postponing a Korban Pesach. Those are not lo taseis, those are aseis that carry punishments. So maybe when the Rambam says lo tasei mefarash b'Torah, he's already gotten rid of Mila and Pesach, so he's implicitly doing it, but he isn't making the passive active distinction. Even if he's doing that, he's making a do not versus do, but that's a form of the commandment as opposed to the substance of the commandment, because there are do nots that also require passivity, right? For example, do not look away from lost objects. Right, that requires, so you violate that passively by standing still. So you can violate. So that would be in do not. That's explicit in the Torah, and yet according to the Gemara, it should push it aside because it's passive, and according to the Rambam, it shouldn't, right? Because the Rambam says if it's an explicit lo tasei in the Torah, then you can't, right? So even though what I said last time could sort of work, it's a push, because really the Rambam is replacing the passive active distinction with a do not distinction in terms of the linguistic formulation of the Torah, and those are not the same thing at all. Right? One easy example, right, with one of the ways which demonstrates that is Tosfos on our sugya says that continuing to wear a kilayim beged is a violation. Right? So that you're actively violating it by continuing to wear it. But continuing to wear a four-cornered garment without tzitzit, Tosfos says, is passive. You're just failing to put on tzitzit. You're doing this the exact same action, right? I have my shoulders a four-cornered shot in his garment. So, right, Tosfos says I'm being halachically active and passive simultaneously by the same action or not action of leaving clothing on me, because I am violating the prohibition against wearing shatnez actively. I'm wearing shatnez, and I am failing to fulfill the positive commandment of putting on tzitzit, so I'm being passive. All right, so passive and active are not the same thing. Right, as we find, you can violate a do not passively by failing to notice a lost item.
Lots of examples of praise in either way,
Mm-hmm.
or wearing garment.
Mm-hmm. Wearing.
Your obligation is to take it off.
No, your obligation is to take it off. That's not your obligation to take it off. Your obligation is to not wear it. You don't fulfill a mitzvah by taking it off. You just stop violating a lo tasei. Yeah, it's true. So, right, the right thing to do is to be active. But Cheses says, but what you legally we construct you as active. You are performing the action of wearing, as opposed to the same garment. Where you are performing the action of not putting on. You are performing the inaction of not putting on tzitzit. So that, right, there's just law, right? It's just law. Okay. So my answer in the Rambam is not. It's not glock, right? It's not a really smooth answer, right? We're still kind of puzzled as to why the Rambam didn't mention it, right? And the Rambam goes in your face because he says it's different there because it says lachoto, right? He should just say it's different there because right? If he had ignored the case entirely, we could give my answer. But he doesn't ignore the case entirely. He quotes the line beforehand that the Gemara says is insufficient. So, not a good answer in the Rambam. Okay, so now we have two mysteries. Right. What is Rav Avigdor Tzarfati doing with the whole sugya? Why is the Rambam doing this weird thing? So then we got to Tosfos. Tosfos says Shevel Tas Shani, and he says V'im Tamar Nazir B'Kohen Gadol Kum Asehu Diatami Lamed. He says, hang on a sec. Shevel Tasa isn't good enough because there are three cases in the last Breita. The first, right? The first thing is that a Kohen has to become Tamei for Meit Mitzvah. Kohen Gadol has become Tamei for Meit Mitzvah. And the second is that a Nazir has become Tamei for Meit Mitzvah. And the third is that a regular person becomes tamei, even if that means postponing a circumcision or a korban pesach. The Cheses says, okay, I can legally construct the third case as passive. You are failing to bring a korban pesach. You are failing to do a brit milah. But how do I legally construct the first two cases? The first two cases, right? The first two cases are active. A Kohen is becoming tummy, right? A Nazir is becoming tummy. The Cheses says there must be answers that are not in the Gemara. Elanira, the Nazir lo gamrina, the Mala Nazir shekeni yeshno b'sheila. Right, so we don't learn from Nazir because Nazir is a different category of its own. It's a category. It's an obligation that can be undone by undoing your neder. Right? Nazir is an obligation accepted by neder, and it can be undone by going to a beit din and asking for your neder to be undone. So it's a weaker category of the oraita. And guess what? The Gemara never told us, but Kodesh Briot also pushes aside that category. Right? Kodesh Briot pushes aside all obligations imposed by neder, or that in any way can be challenged. Okay. What about the Kohen case? That's all the prohibitions that only relate to Kohanim are weaker because they don't relate to the entire Jewish people. So you can't generalize, or at least they're different. You can't generalize from prohibitions that apply only to Kohanim to prohibitions that apply to all the Jews. So now Cheses is telling us that really there are two answers in the Gemara. There are two ways to resolve cases in favor of Kodesh Briot that the Gemara doesn't bother mentioning. We knew about Drabanan, we knew about money, we knew about passive. Also, right, even if it's an active deoraita talking about Yisur, you can still say Kodesh Briot wins if it's Lav Sheno Sheva Bakol. You can still say Kodesh Briot wins even if it's Yeshno B'Sheila. So I argued that right, that was my I think the finish I came up with 2 weeks ago, maybe it was last week. So right, that the argument that this gives you the opportunity to read a sugya. 2 weeks ago, right? To read a sugya as having a vector that once, right? Cheses is supporting the idea that when confronted by a new case, you don't just apply the rules in the Gemara. You think of every possible way in which the Kodesh Briot could win because this deraita is different than Shabbos. Because Cheses has two answers that are not in the Gemara. So why can't there be 20 answers that are in the Gemara? Why can't there be infinite answers in the Gemara? So I pointed out last week, right, but it still seems to be, right, this is a conversation Dan and I had last week, but why don't we undo Shatnez too? Why don't we leave that one case? So I said it was that there's value in maintaining a symbolic prohibition, and then when Dan pushed me, I think I came with a formulation that I like better, which is that maybe the direction I'm suggesting really depends on whether the symbol has been successful. If people still take it as a serious conflict, it's not that Kodesh Briot always beats halacha. They're real value. The other mitzvah has meaning also, and right. So they're not going to take any trivial amount of Kodesh Briot issue or controversial cases of Kodesh Briot and say, Kodesh Briot beats halacha. No issue here at all. Right. So then, okay, once you've taken the halacha seriously as evidenced by, right, you look, there is a case where you have to strip naked in public rather than violate prohibition. So then, then we can say the halacha should end up really leaving that case as the only case. But the more people are likely to take advantage of this in ways that were not envisioned by the people who constructed the exception. So then we'll say, no, you know what? The simple reading of the sugya is that this is a deraita b'kumasei. You can't do anything. And so it builds in. Right? So what I was trying to argue is that the sugya is set up to allow for discretion, where the best outcome is that Kodesh Briot always wins, but everyone understands that that's not obvious. Right? Letting Kodesh Briot win doesn't trivialize the thing it overcomes. Mm-hmm. And doesn't result from not caring enough about halacha. It results from caring a lot about ordinary halacha and caring more about Kodesh Briot. That it's designed to, but if it doesn't do that, so then poskim are entitled to say, no, you know what, this is not a society in which we can give human dignity that absolute legal priority, because it will end up that the law will be just about that. So there are polemic elements in my formulation, but I think it's a good corrective to my usual sort of way of framing, which is just that look, the sugya is a vector. Maybe the sugya is a vector, but how far the vector goes is affected by sustaining circumstances. So here, the real world cases which are approved now, let's say people with colostomy bags getting aliyot.
Oh.
There's a example I think is used. It's used fairly frequently nowadays. On the other hand, they have really controversial cases, which I think a clear distinction are cases where people argue that the entirety of the law is a violation of Kvod HaBriot, and that's what comes up in certain cases of homosexuality. Right, so that's right. So that's why I like the formulation, because if you're implicitly claiming the law has no value, so that would be a real issue. And we'll see that idea come up. But you don't have to agree with me on that, but let's say there's a way in which you could make that argument and say that if the effect of Kvod HaBriot is to undo the law, by saying that we just never want that law to be, that would be a hint. But it could just be trivial cases. Let's say like my argument that since in this circuit all types of kavod matter. So if I think that that rabbinic kavod requires me to steal a sports car because nobody respects me because I don't have a decent car, right? So that would be a misuse, but it's not formally a misuse. Right? It's just an abuse of discretion because there is real kavod issue. There's a real kavod issue, and right. So, but if you really take that, right? If people would really be inclined to do that, if you have a group of rabbis going around stealing cars and saying that, then you have so you have a real problem. I think that would be that would be fairly easy. Okay, that's what we did last 2 weeks. Now I want to point out the mechanical thing this Tosfot does for us. What this Tosfot says structurally is that the answer Sheva al Ta'asa Shani is not a sufficient answer. And Tosfot then provides his own answers for the other two cases. But other people have to deal with the same problem. Right? How do you explain the other two cases? So now we look carefully back at the Rambam. The Rambam says, so why is a lo taseh b'Torah furash b'Torah, right? That sounds like this is category. Right? The Rambam says, Kvod HaBriot is not pushed aside in Easter lo taseh furash b'Torah, but why does it push aside tumat meit? So that means that by tumat meit we're also talking about a lo taseh furash b'Torah. But we pointed out that Mila and Korban Pesach are not lo taseh furash b'Torah. So the Rambam must be using this to resolve the first cases of the Kohen and the Nazir. And the Rambam just says, those cases are different because there's just a Gereka, it just says La'akoto. Right, so the Rambam really has to read it like it's a two-step process. What about Nazir and Kohen? Oh, that's different because that's a verse. And the Sheva al Ta'aseh Shani can only apply about the Mila and Korban Pesach. So the Rambam has to break up the sugya. And so when I saw that, the Rambam has to break up the sugya. Right? Tosfos doesn't have to, because Tosfos thinks the whole sugya is just about Mila and Korban Pesach, and we deal with the Kohen and Nazir cases off screen. Right? But the Rambam has to break up the sugya. And I said, you have to break up the sugya. So now that's got to be the mechanical way that our first Rabbi Avigdor Sarfati, right? That must somehow open the possibility for Rabbi Avigdor Sarfati to read the sugya the way he does. And that's what I say. I've turned it over. I said 95% I'm going to be able to solve this, and then I crashed and burned. But we're going to see today if there is a way at all. Because at the end of the day, it didn't work but both of the cases are meit mitzvah, so they're all talking about Kvod Meitz. So how does it help you at all? And so I thought, look, somebody's breaking out the sugya, that's got to be able to do it, and yet, just the end, mechanically, it just didn't do it. So we're going to try and go on a little bit in other Rishonim, and then at the end of the shir, I'm going to try and propose two ways back. One of which will maybe put together my initial thought that this mechanical solution really is the way out. Okay, so here we go. So there's a Meiri. Meiri says the following: Made mitzvah. We're still on the bottom source of page 2. Who made she'ein lo kovrin? When it made somebody who has no one to bury them, that we all know. Rashai hakohen af bekum aseh lidchot lo ta'aseh hamor bataras. Meiri's formulation is very sharp, right? Even he makes it clear. Even bekum aseh, you can push it, right? You can put right. The kohen can become tameh. Kidei li tameh lo lekavro midin kavod habriot. Right, so Meiri says Meiri walks right into our issue. He says, look, here is a case where Kvod HaBriot is docha something bekum aseh. Right, that's the Kohen in the Nazir case. So that sounds very much like what Rabbi Victor Sarfati said. Now he's not going to reach that conclusion, but it's clear that he reads the sugya in a way which is going to open this possibility. Right, that there's a way to push aside kum aseh. Okay, we're going to skip the small print lines. Shema Tamar, Manish Damet mitzvah tumla shutra lavor le b'tumat Torah b'kum aseh. And it'll tell me, right, Vidli Gamramina. Right, what do we learn from it? So his answer is Eina Sheila. No, that's not a good question. Because there's a pasuk. Okay, that's a really bad answer. Because the Gemara's next answer is Vidli Gamramina. Right? Why don't we learn from it? Why does Meiri do this? Because Meiri is writing with the Rambam open in front of him. And that's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says that's different because it has a pasuk. Okay. But the Meiri, satisfied with quoting Rambam, is not satisfied that the Rambam is enough. He says, in the end, he says, Vim Tomar, Afatorah Heachitira, right? So now he quotes the next line. Right? He'll tell you, but how did the Torah allow this, right? That's a great formulation, right? How could the Torah allow this? And that's harking back to the whole sugya, which is asking, which is saying against the will of God, right? So how could the Torah say something that is against the will of God, right? That's the way he formulates the question, right? Going back to our theological mess at the very beginning. So his answer is, some people say, as Tosfot said, that it's because the Kohen is a different kind of case, right? So he's quoting Tosfot, but then he adds in his own interesting one. He says, some people have that as the text of the Talmud. That's a really interesting thing, right? So the Meiri suggests that there were people who had that line Sheken Yeshna B'She'ela, where we have Shevel Ta'aseh Sham. Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe it doesn't solve the problem for the Rambam. All it does is point out that it's that really everyone has to have this problem. Right? Everyone has this problem that the sugya as we have it is ineluctably incomplete. It leaves two cases unanswered. Okay, now we're going to see a Gemara which opens up the possibility of reversing everything. So the next Gemara, bottom page, verse 3, the Gemara says, this is the Gemara in Nazir, which is the source of it's the other place where the Breita that we quote as the fifth question in our sugya comes from. Right, really, there's a machloket there, and right, so there are two different versions, but for our purposes, it all comes down to the same thing right now. The Breita there says, "Achoto lamali." Why do I need the verse? Why do we need the phrase about the sister? It already says you shouldn't become tamei if you're your father or your brother. Why do I need to add your sister? So, but really, what the Gemara is saying is as follows. The Gemara is saying is, why do we have some version or other of this? Let's take this one as the simplest one. Why do we mention the father? It says that a Kohen can't become tamei to his father because to teach you that he can become tamei for a mitzvah. Okay, why do we say mother or brother, which version you have? Well, that's to teach you that a Nazir can't do it, right? So one for Kohen, one for a Nazir. Then we say, one for a Kohen who is a Nazir. Whole debate, right? What do you mean, right? Kohen Gadol was a Nazir, right? We have all these cases. And then the Gemara says, what about Lachoto? Well, Lachoto is there to teach me Mila and Korban Pesach. Okay, right? That's exactly what our sugya is. And now the Gemara tells us, right? But why do I need that? If we allow, right, this is a great question. If we already allowed a Kohen to violate a deraisa bekum aseh, we allowed a Kohen to become tameh, then obviously we allow you not to bring a korban pesach. If we already allowed it right actively, why do we need another verse to teach me that we allow it in cases where it's passive? That's a great question. So the Gemara answers, Kishor Rachman l'meit mitzvah, when the Torah allows you to violate prohibitions from meit mitzvah, Nazir of a Kohen, right? When the Torah permits a Nazir of a Kohen to do that, the Easter lavahu, that's because it's merely a law. But Mila Pesach the Kare, but Brit Milah and Korban Pesach, even though they are dues, but they carry punishments. You get karet if you don't bring a Korban Pesach. You get karet if you don't do Brit Milah. So I might think that even if a Nazir and a Kohen can violate halacha bikum deoraisa bikum aseh, I might still not know that I can bring that I can delay a Korban Pesach for a mitzvah. Okay, so the poster we assume, right, that the Sheva Altasa case is the weak case. The Gemara says no. The Sheva Altasa case is the strong case because it carries a punishment. No. Or maybe you won't get courage at the end because you bring a Pesach Sheni, but it doesn't change the fact that you violated prohibition. Right now, the Gemara could have said that reason we don't learn from Korban Pesach is because it's correctable, just like Brit Milah. Right? It could have said it's not. It could have said what's different is not Sheva Altasa Shani. What's different is those are correctable things, right? Like Allah Bani Tekla say, but it doesn't give that answer. All right, so it turns out if we read this Gemara into ours, so by the time we get to the line Sheva Altasa Shani, really what we've said is, yeah, you're right. You can actually violate all deoraisas bekum aseh as long as they don't carry a punishment of karet. And Sheva Altasa Shani is only for things that have karet. You can't violate active things that have right. So we have a new distinction in the Gemara, right? We thought that all of that. We thought in the end of the Gemara, even without victory, we thought straight. All the Gemara said was, you can violate halacha passively money. No, actually, you can violate halacha about money, or about isur, so long as it doesn't carry the punishment of the karet, or even if it carries the punishment of the karet, so long as it's Sheva Altasa, right? So there's a whole new right. It sounds like if we read this Gemara straight, it sounds like there's a section right that there's a different thing missing in the Gemara than Tosfot. Right? Tosfot says we got rid of them all by saying yeshno b'sheila and la'avshin shava bakol, but the Gemara seems to think that no, what's different about those two cases that they're only lavim, but we have already conceded at that point that that Sheva Altasa kumaseh is not good enough, and it won't work. Okay, so here's where I thought of the first clue. Aha. Well, maybe Rabbi Cheses read the sugya. Everyone points out, right, that the previous question, also the one about lost objects, that's a case where you are practically. Yeah, you're right. You're not returning the lost object, even though formally you're violating the prohibition of not looking away. So we could have made the distinction there. We could have made the passive active distinction there. Mm-hmm. The Gemara doesn't. So we raise the question, right? So does the Gemara not do it because it's because it actually doesn't affect things about money, and things about money you can do whether actively or passive, or does it not do it because you know what? We're going to give that answer next, and once we give that answer, you'll understand even money only applies Sheva Altasa. But we could read this again in a very fancy way. Yeah, well, when we left, right, that the way the Rabbi Cheses says, okay, so we thought that when we left that sugya, we thought that for things about money, we left open the possibility that things about money are only Sheva Altasa. But the first two cases in the last bright, they get rid of that. So now we really think that case of lost object stands even for violating active things. And guess what? It's not. We also can't say this only about money because we know that Kvod HaBriot extends to things that are Isur. So before the last line of the sugya, right, our clear conclusion is going to be that Kvod HaBriot pushes aside things even for even B'kumasei, even for Isur. Then the Gemara says, oh no, that case is different. So maybe if he doesn't already said, oh, that, but the Gemara said that case is different than the last case. That was only because that case is about Kvod HaMeit. But lost objects are Kvod HaChaim. So by reading the first two cases here, as telling you that the distinction between Isur and Mamon in the fourth case was wrong, and the hypothetical distinction between Shevel Tasa and Kumasei is wrong. So then you can say, okay, so I got to my point, and now there's the last case. The last case, right? That's only because it's Kvod HaMeit. So that would work sort of, but it's iffy because you know what? But the two cases you prove things from are also Kvod HaMeit. Right. So once we say that Kvod HaMeit is different because it's passive, so why don't you say Kvod HaMeit is different? Well, you should undo what you did, right? So I can get there. I can get to a point where he does it, but no. So I could be really fancy and say that maybe there was a girsa which didn't have those last two lines. Which is what the Rambam had. Maybe the reason the Rambam doesn't have those last two lines at all. He didn't have Shevel Tasa Shani at all. So if you're making a read this figure the way I just did, and doesn't have the last line Shevel Tasa Shani. Or if his last line says Yeshno Bish'ela, which the Meiri says in the Gersa, so then he has a way of reading the Sugya, because the Sugya never said anything about Shevel Tasa. You'll tell me, well, how do we get rid of it? Well, that's because it's a pasuk, or because Yeshno Bish'ela. So that is a way. It requires relying on a claim that such a Gersa exists. Which is exist. The Meiri says so, with maybe a little bit of support in the Rambam. So it's a little awkward. It's a little dicey. It's neither if we just say they have the line Sheyeshna V'Sheila. Right? It's neither right. It's neither that way. Might be enough. Right. So it's right that to say that Rabbi Cheses ultimately had the same text as the Rambam. And that text doesn't mention Shevel Tasa Shani at all. Okay, then why should he mention it? Now, it also doesn't justify the distinction between Kvod HaMeit and Kvod HaChaim so much, right? Right? Because where did he get this idea that Corey? Right? He says that Kvod HaMeit, right, is only Shevel Tasa, not Kumasei. So, how did he get that from? A little bit of a stretch. Yeah, lots of stretches. Okay, it was the best I could do with opportunities, but it's no longer the best I can do, I think. So now we're going to try and see if we can go one step further and see if we can push the mechanical opening I have. Right. So we see what we're trying to do. We have this opening that there are two cases not mentioned. That we can read the Gemaras in stages about the first stage about those two cases, and the last stage about the third case, or maybe it's all about the third case. But we haven't quite gotten the solution that we want. Okay, let's go on. The Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Tzadi Daled, we're on page 4 now, tells you a story. There's a dead person in a particular place. And Rav Nachman allowed them to take the body out to out of wherever it was into in a private domain into a rabbinic public domain. So Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Mar ben Ravina, said to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, "What's he doing?" He must be following Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds famously that if you do an action, what's called a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, if you do an action, and it's hopeless to try to define it, but let's say this is the one case everyone understands, sort of. If you do an action for something other than its ordinary purpose, whatever you want to call it, it's not a biblical violation. And the classic case is if you take something from a private domain to a public domain because you want it out of the private domain, and not because you want it in the public domain. Right. So here they don't want the dead body in the public domain; they want it out of the private domain. So therefore, Rav Nachman allows you. So his suggestion is Rav Nachman is following Rabbi Shimon's position that in such a case it's not a biblical violation; it's only a rabbinic violation. Right. So he said, but it's still a rabbinic violation. So the answer is, I didn't tell you could take it out to a biblical public domain. I said a rabbinic private domain. So, right. So this, and maybe Rosh Shimon allows it. And sorry, and he said, and he says, Gadol Kvod Habriot, Shedocheh Lo Taseh Shabbatar. Right. So, why did I allow them to take it out into a rabbinic domain? Because Kvod Habriot pushes aside rabbinic commandments. Okay, so we have fine case, right? You can take the dead body out, into a Shura Rabin Drabanan because it pushes aside Lo Taseh Shabbatar. And here again we get to see, but as I told you in the sugya, everyone knew that that the Breita Gadol Kvod Habriot Shedocheh Lo Taseh Shabbatar was talking about Drabanan, because they just quoted naturally here, right, about a Drabanan and not a Dioraisa, right? So everyone knew that already. That's not an answer developed by our sugya. It's an answer assumed by our sugya. Okay. Now the Meiri on this says the following: the Shema Tamar, but you might say to me, "V'natir kol tiltul l'kvod habriot shedochet lo taseh d'Rabbanan sharei tiltul d'Rabbanan hu." So he's right. So he's talking about this. He's talking about a parallel case, which doesn't matter, where there's a case where somebody allows you to take a dead body out, but only if you put something that is not muksa on top of it. As you put a loaf of bread on the corpse, then you carry the loaf of bread. You carry the loaf. That solves the muksa problem. Okay, but that's not our issue right now. All that matters is the Meiri wants to know, why do we put any conditions on what we allow for kvod habriot d'Rabbanan? And here's his answer. He says, "Shelo ne'amar kvod habriot ela likvod hachayim." Kvod habriot only applies to the honor of the living. Hakol shemet masriach, but anytime that the dead body rots, the chayim mitbazim bo, and so the live people have their dignity injured by being around the stench of a rotting corpse, that's when it's permitted. Okay, I think as is said, he says in our sugya and Daf Sadi Daled, where Rav Nachman allows you to take it out to a karmelit. But he says, "Umikol makom, the Gedolei HaMechabrim ra'iti ba." But I saw the Gedolei HaMechabrim. The Meiri always refers to people by nicknames. There's a code. There's a key to the nicknames in his introduction. So Gedolei HaMechabrim, the great composer, is the Rambam. Right. So Gedolei HaMechabrim ra'iti ba meit sheizriya v'nimsa misbazeh bein hachayim v'heim mitbazim bo. So the Rambam's language is, if a corpse begins to rot, and so it is humiliated among the living, and the living are humiliated by it, the Rambam mentions both. So Alma, the Meiri says, right? So it seems to me that the Meiri says that you have to be concerned even about the humiliation of the dead. Okay, so that's only going to apply once the body begins, but I think it's still only going to apply once the body begins to rot. Below Kedivrei Homer and She'ein Dochin Lo Taseh Ela L'Kvod HaChayim. But the Rambam is against the position who says that we only push aside Lo Taseh to the honor of the living. Why says the Meiri? Sharei Meit Mitzvah Ein Sham Kavod L'Chayim. Case of Meit Mitzvah is purely a case of honoring the dead, and so if we allow kvod habriot in the case of Meit Mitzvah, so obviously you must allow kvod habriot in the case of kvod hachayim. So this is really interesting, right? So Meiri says there is somebody out there who says, not right. We were worried about Rabbi Tzarfati said maybe the limitation of Sheva al Tasa only applies to kvod hamet. But it turns out there seems to be somebody out there who thinks that no kvod habriot, right? No kvod habriot ever applies to, right? Ever applies to dead bodies. And how can that be? Says Meiri. But there's an explicit sugya which says that Meit Mitzvah is kvod habriot. That's a really good question. And yet there's somebody there. Right? So it's really, really interesting that there's somebody there. So who is this person? So we go on to the Chiddushei Rashba. The Chiddushei Rashba says, "The Harayvid Zal Pirsho Lazu, the She'enim Mosili Chvodo Shel Mates." The Ravid says that this whole sugya on Daf Sadi about taking the dead body out only applies when you're not doing it for the honor of the dead. First of all, he says, because maybe the dead is more honored in the body, in the house and in the street. So what are you doing? You're not taking the dead body out to the street for its right for its honor. Obviously. So that's a good reasoning. And secondly, he says, right. He says, right. He says, right. So right. He has proof that we wouldn't do it for that purpose. Okay. So now we know who the figure is. It seems like it's the Ravid who explained the sugya, saying that this is only permitted for the honor of the living and not for the honor of the dead. There's also a work called the Sefer Hashlama. Sefer Hashlama says, if we can look at the underline section, it says, I received this answer from my father. That we only allow this, right, for the honor of the living and not for the dead. And he goes further. He says, so in that case, in the Gemara and Shabbos, the living could not handle the stench. And it's the honor of the living that's considered kvod habriot that pushes aside a lot of Torah. Shehu lav de lo tasur, meaning lav de lo tasur. Aval kvod hamet eno kvod habriot. What? Does he not know about our sugya and brachot? And so we haven't found Rav Avigdor at Sarfati yet. We found something much worse. Right? We find people just going on as if our sugya doesn't exist at all. How on earth do they do that? Okay, so I want to take a step back. Let's turn back to page 3. Page 3 is Rashi, and I cheated here. Usually, I think that one should learn the sugya with Rashi first. But sometimes it's really useful. So when I was my video on how to teach Talmud with Rashi, so I find out that one of the great difficulties that pedagogically teachers have, and it's the same problem with translations, is that if teachers explain the sugya to people first, they're always going to explain it with Rashi, because it doesn't make sense to that Rashi. Rashi fills all the gaps, and then the students read Rashi and they don't understand why it matters. It's just telling us what the Gemara already said. So my suggestion was that you teach the student that you integrate Rashi as a single text. Rashi and Gemara should be one single text, and you teach the students that way, and then you test them on whether they can read the Gemara and have it make sense to you without Rashi. So then all of a sudden they'll be, look, whoa, without the word, there are words here. They're not here. I have to put them in, right? They'll realize, oh my goodness, I'm putting all these words in, right? So that way, that's a way of getting them to understand that Rashi is filling, right? Rashi is not the text. Rashi is filling gaps in the text, and maybe, usually, I think he's filling them correctly, whether because of tradition or because of brilliance. But if you want to understand what the other commentators are doing, you have to realize that there are gaps. Another way to do that is to teach the other commentators first and not teach you Rashi. And let's see if that works this time. Okay, so we're on page 3. You'll see that really there are, however, part of the challenge is that Rashi is a text, and texts are subject to lacunae. So really we have 2 versions of Rashi. One is the Rashi itself, and the other is the Rashi found in the Piskei Rid. So I put in the version found in the Piskei Rid, I put all the things that are in his version that are not in Rashi's version in bold, or they're different. So you can see that there are lots of differences in the text. So you can follow along whichever one you want. Let's read the Rashi on top, and where it matters, you can, which I have asterisk in the Rashi on top. You can look down at the bottom and see where the text might be better. So Rashi says Sheval Tasa Shani. So he's got that one. Varim Rabim Hitiru L'Akor Dvar Torah. Right, there are lots of things that they permitted to uproot the Torah. Mipnei Siag, Mipnei Kvod Habriot. This is an amazing line. Right, Rashi is telling you that Sheval Tasa Shani is an answer the Gemara gives somewhere else in Yevamos, Daf 90. In Yevamos Daf 90, the Gemara asks the general question: are rabbis allowed to simply decree to annul a Torah law? And right, that's right. Ask the question. Interesting. There's interesting test cases, right? Like, can they declare that if you took truma and that truma should have been valid biblically, and they say no, you have to take it again, and the truma you took doesn't count at all? What? It's truma, right? It's biblical truma, right? It's prohibited to eat it. Can they do things like that? So the Gemara at the end says that in most circumstances, there's an exception that doesn't matter to us. They can only do it if it's shev al tasa. It's the limit on rabbinic power. They can only uproot the Torah passively. Now Rashi says, you know what? This answer, Sheva al Tasa Shani, is the same answer as that one. Because it's the same use of rabbinic power. His opening line is there are many things that they, meaning right, they, the rabbis, permitted, Hitziru, to uproot words of Torah, mipnei siag umipnei kvod habriot, whether it is as a attempt to protect the Torah, which is one purpose, or for kvod habriot. Right. So Rashi frames kvod habriot as a rabbinic decision to overrule. Right. Right, and that ties in very nice. I think it's always lo tasur. Right. Sometimes it overrides lo tasur. Right. Sometimes it overrides lo tasur, and sometimes lo tasur tells you to override it. Right, because you have to listen to the rabbis when they tell you not right, to violate the Torah. Right, it's a clever move. But Rashi says, but they only do just like to make a siag, they can only do it passively. So too, for kvod habriot, they can do it passively. Eliyoshev ben Kamol, you can do is stay passive. With Vartor ne'akar me'elav, the Torah is uprooted by himself, and he lists all the cases, or some of the cases the Gemara does there, right? Like not blowing shofar on lulav, or carrying a lulav on Shabbat, right? That's where mitzvahs d'oraisa. To blow a shofar on Rosh Hashanah, but the rabbis say, no, you can't blow a shofar when Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos. Right? Because we're afraid you're going to carry the shofar for Amot Rosh Hashanah, right? Whatever, right? So that's all passive. But you can't uproot it actively. And if you wear kilayim, right, that's really doing it because you're wearing it. Okay. Now he says, V'tuma gufe, and becoming right, and your body becoming really tamei. So you would think the tumah, right? You would think that means the tumah of your body. So that's why it's useful to look down. I didn't even catch this one, right? Where the Piskei Reed has me tumah gufa, from the case of tumah itself, not from the tumah of your body. We're not talking about your body. We're talking about the or his. We're talking about the kohen. Right. So tumah gufa, shehutra lekohen lenazir letamei mitzvah. The first two cases, the kamei aker be'adayim, where you uproot it. Mipnei kvod habriot. Oh, so actually, hang on a second. You can't get out of those two cases. They really are kvod habriot also, and they are kum v'aseh, just like right, just like we saw we saw it's just like by Teretscape, right? My proposed answer was right. Those are active in their kvod habriot. The lav shevel tasu. This is why we don't derive from them. So Rashi has a clever way out. He says that even though those cases are because of kvod habriot, but kvod habriot there does not push aside the negative. Rather, he says, because the meikara, and I think the version of the Tosas in the Piskei Reed is much better. The meikara, because from the beginning, lo nitan hazarat lo taseh, there never was a prohibition against for a Nazir or Kohen not to become tamei for a meit mitzvah. The tuma lav al meit mitzvah nichtaba. The prohibitions against becoming tamei never apply to a meit mitzvah. So it's not that we're pushing things aside; it's that we're saying that the law never applied. So you can't derive anything from them. Right? Because in the end, what makes them different is just that it says la'achoto. La'achoto teaches you that the prohibition against becoming tamei never applied to a meit mitzvah for a kohen and a nazir, and therefore Rashi says, even though I know that the rationale of the Torah for saying that is kvod habriot, but I can't derive from that where the Torah doesn't say anything. Where the Torah said something here. Right? It says it doesn't apply here. But, says Rashi, Aval Mila uPesach l'chol Yisrael nemru, but Mila and Pesach, which were said to all Jews, meaning even to, but they're not a prohibition against becoming tamei, but they are as a positive commandment to bring them. So we're at, right, so therefore, I can't say that the prohibition against becoming tamei doesn't apply to this person. I can say the prohibition against that there is no prohibition for a nazir to become tamei for a meit mitzvah, because the Torah says don't become tamei except for a meit mitzvah. But I can't say that the prohibition against becoming tamei for a Jew doesn't apply to a meit mitzvah, because there is no prohibition against becoming tamei for a Jew. There's just an obligation to bring a korban pesach, and all Jews have an obligation to bring a korban pesach. So I can't say, Rashi, in that case, I can't say that there's no obligation that's being pushed aside. So Rashi says the first two cases really are cases where Kvod HaBriot pushes aside, where Kvod HaBriot is the rationale of Torah, but they're not precedents. Because the Torah goes so far as to say, there's no prohibition. Okay, so you can't drive anything. There's just no prohibition. All I'm doing now is theology. I think the reason the Torah said that is. But it's not precedent for Kvod HaBriot overriding halacha, because it just, Kvod HaBriot prevented it from being halacha. So Rashi says the only things I can learn things from are the Milo and Korban Pesach, and they can be pushed aside by Kvod HaBriot. And the last line he says, it says Vitam the Tchiyaso Ini Biyadayim, and the reason they can push it aside is because it's not active. Elo Bishivato Yidachem Mitzvah, it's only passive. And then Rashi does exactly the structural thing that he needs to do. The Afuke Kilayim, as opposed to Shatnez, right, where it is where it would have to be pushed aside actively. Okay, and by Shatnez also, right, you can't say that, right, there's no way to say, oh, the Torah, there's no ground for saying the Torah never said you can't wear Shatnez. You can't wear Shatnez, that's going to humiliate you. No, the Torah says you can't wear Shatnez. Most of the time, there's nothing to do with humiliation. Okay, so let's figure out what we have in the end. What we have in the end, right, is we have a whole bunch of different solutions to the problem of the first two cases. Rashi's solution is the first two cases are cases where you push it aside, b'kumaseh, except it's not pushing aside. So it's not a precedent. There's really no law at all. Tosfos says those two cases are different because they're yeshno b'she'elah, right? And they're or they're lav she'ena shaveh b'kol. And Rabbi Sarfati said no, those two cases are different because those cases are kvod hamet and the other cases are kvod hachayim. Except how can that be? They're all the same case. They're the same case, right? So we saw the distinction in kvod hachayim and kvod hamet that we saw. People have that, but how did he get right? Like, check out here. We're going to go a little bit over time. That's okay, but that won't take so long. Okay, so just to try to look at the last source on page 3, right? Just to know that the issue of whether mate mitzvah is kvod habriot shows up explicitly in the Gemara. Mikra Megillah mate mitzvah, which way you have to choose between bearing a mate mitzvah or reading the Megillah, which one comes first? Is the Mikra Megillah adif? Do we say that reading the Megillah comes first because of presuming Nisa? Or Dilma mate mitzvah adif mishum kvod habriot? Okay, well that's pretty clear, right? Mate mitzvah is kvod habriot, and the answer is hadar pashta mate mitzvah adif. Right? Amar Mar Gadol Kvod HaBriot Shedochet Lo Taseh Shebatorah. So you cannot get any clearer than saying the Meit Mitzvah is Kvod HaBriot than this sugya. And yet the Meiri quotes somebody in the Sefer HaShlama quotes somebody who says that no, Kvod HaBriot is only Kvod HaChaim and not Kvod HaMeit. So now those people are going not only as our sugya, they're going as a totally different sugya in the Gemara. They are, however, supported by a Gemara which says that if there's a dead body and a bride at a crossroads, or actually not a crossroads, at a bridge, and the question goes first. So the answer is that the bride goes first because Kvod HaChaim beats Kvod HaMeit. So they're right, Kvod HaChaim beats Kvod HaMeit. But how do they get the idea there's no Kvod HaChaim in this? It says there's no Kvod HaMeit here, right? It says explicitly. Right, we read the line in the Hashlama, right? He said his father said, right? The Hashlama said, my father said, "Aval kvod hamet eno kvod habriot." That's the last underlined line of the Hashlama on page 4. But look, it says here. Okay, so now, right, we are really in trouble. So we have to be really, really fancy. Now, I just say methodologically, what I like to do is I like to multiply problems. But I think that if you have one problem, if you just have lots more problems, eventually the answer to the other problems will solve your initial problem. Right, it's the theory of Tom Sawyer rolling the marbles down the hill, right? Hoping that he loses a marble, right? And he says, okay, right. So we want to find that marble, roll another marble down the hill, and eventually another marble. They end up losing lots of marbles, but they don't all go in the same direction. But if you roll lots of marbles down the hill, eventually you'll find the one you lost. Right. So the first marble is really valuable, and you can roll lots of non-valuable marbles. I think that's what happens. That's right. I don't know exactly. Right? They roll lots of non-valuable marbles. Okay. So, right. So I think if we build up problems, eventually we can find a solution. So we know, like in that sugya there, right? We said Why are you taking the dead body out? You're taking the dead body out because when it begins to stink, it's kvod hachayim, and until then it's until then it's just kvod hametz. Right, that's for those people suggested. Okay, which means that immediate burial of the dead is kvod hametz, but eventual burial of the dead is kvod hachayim. So actually, within mitzvah itself, we can make the distinction between kvod hametz and kvod hachayim. Right, that immediate burial is kvod hametz. Eventual burial is kvod hachayim. Now, we will note that in the three cases in the Gemara, only one of the cases is time dependent. The last one, you have to bury the mitzvah immediately, right? Which means you can't go bring your korban pesach, or you can't do your circumcision on the 8th day. Why not just say that you can bring your korban pesach and come back and bury the dead? It's on a road somewhere, or it's in a right somewhere, right? Move it to where nobody is and go bring your korban pesach. So it must be that case is teaching us that even the immediate burial of the dead it pushes aside halacha. But that's kvod hametz. What about the case of the Kohen and the Nazir? In the case of the Kohen and the Nazir, there's no reason for the immediate. So when you do the burial, right, it's because you have to bury them eventually at some point. And that is kvod hachayim. Eventual burial is kvod hachayim. But okay. So the only question really remaining is there a way to say, but really what goes on there, right, is that you're becoming tamei. Why should you? Right? What about? Is there a way in which becoming tamei itself could be kvod hachayim? So here, the Rav has a word, and I haven't this right. So I think I actually solved the problem already, right? Just you understand what we're saying. If the first two cases are only kvod hachayim, and the last case is kvod hametz, and the first two cases are not subject to the answer of sheva al taseh shani. Whereas the last case is, so now Rabbi Cheses reads this beautifully. Right, the first two cases prove everything. What about the last case? Well, the last case is because only kvod hametz. Okay, well, kvod hametz is limited to sheva al taseh. As he reads this beautifully, but I want to try to add one thing which might or might not be true. So the Rav has a famous word, which I think I always found very convincing in the Rambam. I never looked at it outside the Rambam. The Rav's claim is that it's not that there's a difference between the obligation to become tamei for a mitzvah and the obligation to become tamei for anybody else. The obligation to become tamei for a mitzvah is only insofar as necessary for the burial, whereas the obligation to become tamei for the relative is a chiyuv of avilus. Right. Even if you're not necessary for the burial, a Kohen has an obligation to become tamei. Right. They have to find for their dead relative. Okay. So now the question is, right. So the Rav makes the claim that that's the difference in it. So that would suggest that the Rav's right that in our case, the Kohen and the Nazir they don't need to become tamei to bury them. The person is just that if necessary, they're allowed to become tamei, which is interesting because the Gemara derives all three of them from the same pasuk. So maybe I think that the Rebbe is, what I recall, pshat in the Rambam. But does everyone necessarily agree with that? I don't know if everyone necessarily agrees with that. Okay, one more step. The Rambam also seems to hold that there is no obligation for Kohanim to become tamei for relatives who committed suicide. It's because, now where does he get that idea from? He gets that idea from a Breita in Maseches Machos. Let's take a look at the Ramban on the bottom page 4. The Ramban says, now, right, you all know that we have essentially eliminated all the restrictions on burial of suicides now. So we're talking, should have a trigger warnings or anything like that, right? But I'm just teaching right historical. Ein Korean, right? So the Ramban, this is Ramban's right down. The Ramban quotes quotes a Breita in a Gaonic Breita, which says somebody who commits suicide, we do nothing with the body. Ein Korean, we don't tear. Ein Cholsin, Ein Maspidin alav, right? We don't give we don't give eulogies. Aval omdin alav b'shura, but we stand to make lines. The omrim alav birkat avelim ipnei shu kavod lachayim. So if somebody committed suicide, the rule is anything which is for hachayim, every people have to do it. But the kol she'no kvod l'chayim, but if it's not kvod hachayim, but rather kvod hametz, in rabim mitaskin, right? That's a fairly reasonable one. Okay. Venereally, so it seems to me, it says the Ramban, the anchor in the kvod kamar. That means that we don't tear for honor. Aval krovim haraim litabil korim dekriya chiyuva. But the relatives do have to tear because that he thinks is an obligation. Now here's my question: what is an obligation? Is an obligation in terms of what? So we could read it as saying that the Ramban thinks that for the relatives to tear is in some way kvod hachayim, as opposed to kvod hamet. Could be the Ramban just thinks that that you can't cancel the obligations. That's a little weird because there's a source for canceling the obligations, right? Because in Tamar, he's saying right. You think right? He's right. If you think he's exempt, then he doesn't. He wasn't right. He didn't fit the behavioral standards. You don't have to do anything for him. So then they shouldn't do avilut either. But he says, hang on a second. How can the other people stand in line and to comfort them if they don't have to mourn? Obviously, they have to mourn. Okay. So there's machlokas in the Rambam and the Ramban about whether the positive obligation of tearing applies to suicides. Now, it is generally accepted that the issue of whether Kohanim have to become Tameh is exactly the same issue. That according to the Rambam, Kohanim do not have to become Tameh for suicides, but according to the Ramban, they do. Now, if we have a general rule that says you only do things that are kvod chayim, so it turns out that becoming tameh by obligation is kvod chayim, not kvod hamet. That's right. That's why the Ramban would say we do it, just like we tear. Right? It's part of your dignity as a mourner. It's not for the honor of the dead. It's for the honor of the living to show that they lost, that the person they care about is meaningful. So if that's the case, right, it would turn out that the Kohen, right. I would think that according to the Rav, it would turn out that a Kohen and a Nazir probably have an obligation to become Tameh for a Meit Mitzvah. And the Rav is correct that the ordinary human obligation to become Tameh for a Meit Mitzvah in the Ramban, right? In the Rambam, maybe I assume the Rav is correct that in the Rambam, nobody has an obligation to become Tameh for a Meit Mitzvah. But in the Ramban, maybe, Kohanim and a Nazir do have an obligation to become Tameh for it, right? Because that's part of the obligations. The obligations of Kvod HaChayim, as you see, and if that's the case, then there's a beautiful way of reading the Gemara, because the first two cases are talking about the Kohen and the Nazir, and they actually have to become Tameh. They have to become Tameh. So that right. So that's talking about Kvod HaChayim, and that's why Kvod HaChayim pushes aside even Mikum Maseh. Whereas the third case, which is talking about an ordinary person has no obligation to become Tameh because there's no meaning in their becoming Tameh, and therefore that's Kvod HaMeit. So we can get to Rabbi Sarfati's conclusion in two different ways. Right? We can say that the difference between the first two cases and the third case is that the first two cases don't have a time component, and therefore they will end up being Kvod Chaim because leaving the dead unburied permanently is always Kvod Chaim. It's only immediate burial that's Kvod Chaim. So that's the difference between the first two cases and the third cases, or we can say that the first two cases are dealing with people who have an obligation to become Tanei. And that's the Kvod Chaim obligation, whereas the last cases are dealing with people who have an obligation of burial, and that's an obligation of Tanei. So Vigor Sefati works both ways. All right. Thank you. I thought that was a fun, dramatic way to end the series. I have to write this up. Thank you both for staying with. It was really I learned a great deal. I wish there were a way of getting like I feel like I'm not doing the service I want to the community. Because I'm not pulling lots of people in to learn, which is why I want to do something else. I'm open to ideas, but I really appreciate. For me, the learning was great, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to do it. I realized how much more work how much was left undone by the book.